And to both of you, wonderful stuff. Thank you, Alexi Russell, Martin Bosby, for being with me.
Pleasure.
Tomorrow, Friday, and what does that mean? That means Power Ballad Friday.
Thank goodness I escaped that one.
Yeah.
I love
sounds.
No.
You see, Martin, you're on the right attitude. Power Ballad Friday tomorrow. Yeah, good on you. See you then.
See you, Wallace. Bye.
Bye.
Good evening, this is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge. Haideaki nei, Christchurch's big stink, this toxic stench that has locals short of breath, unable to sleep, sore throats at their wits' end. So what's the council going to do about it? The Mayor joins us. Shocking, the police describe finding 4 children, one as young as 7, robbing a shopping mall. Cancer patients call on the government to fund more drugs as their medical bills skyrocket. The Auckland block's getting a tart up to make them ready for more housing, but there's a warning the rates hikes in the city won't be enough to fill the council's coffers. And speaking of hikes, the ones with boots and a backpack. Kiwis have been seeing plenty of the country while the borders have been closed. You can watch us live on Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie. I'm Evie Ashton. A Christchurch City Councillor has called for a disaster response to the stench coming from a fire-damaged wastewater treatment plant. People who live near the Bromley plant have told a council meeting they can't sleep and the smell makes them feel sick. Linwood Ward Councillor Yanni Johansson says an 18,000-seat stadium was built in 11 weeks in 2012, so the same quick problem-solving skills should be applied to the plant.
We need to do things in a unique way to solve this problem and address the odours as soon as possible. I hope that we can show as much commitment to solving this problem as we can when we build a temporary rugby stadium in Addington.
City Council staff say public health officials haven't raised any direct concerns about the smell. The council has agreed in principle to move the plant to another site. The police say the parents of 4 children who broke into a Hamilton shopping mall were either unaware their kids were out or not in a state to care for them. At 1 a.m, the police found the children, aged between 7 and 12, had broken into Chartwell shopping mall. They stole various toys, including plastic guns. Hamilton City Area Commander Inspector Andrea Macbeth says they've spoken to the parents or guardians.
Some of the children come from difficult situations, poverty, and families where there are some addiction issues, or perhaps where looking after the child is not at the forefront of the priorities for the family. And in this case, sadly, there are some examples of that.
In fleeing, one of the 4 boys fell 8 metres and was taken to hospital with an injured arm. They've all been referred to Youth Aid. Meanwhile, a 12-year-old girl broke into an Auckland dairy and drove off in a waiting vehicle. The police say that at about 11 o'clock on Sunday night, 3 people ran out of a dairy in Grey Lynn, including the girl, who drove them down the southern motorway. She took an off-ramp and crashed into a tree. The 5 occupants were arrested and 3 have been referred to Youth Aid. Police say a large amount of stolen property was recovered, including cigarettes. White supremacy was the leading driver of objectionable online content investigated last year. The Department of Internal Affairs has released its first annual report that breaks down extremist content on its radar. Here's our political reporter, Annika Smith.
The report shows white identity-motivated extremist ideology accounts for, by far, the largest portion of content investigated last year. It also found that nearly 3 years since the Christchurch mosque attacks, the massacre livestream continues to be shared and promoted, particularly by white identity-motivated extremists. Internal Affairs says it shows the attacks continue to have a huge impact on New Zealand's online extremist environment. It expects the number of referrals to it will rise as awareness of its role in countering online extremism grows.
Meanwhile, a study out of the US has found social media platforms don't act on most instances of anti-Muslim hate speech, despite vowing to after the 2019 mosque attacks. And a breast cancer patient says it's grossly unfair that people are missing out on potentially life-saving treatment because of the cost. A report by the Cancer Control Agency has found that more than 1,000 New Zealanders can't get drugs that are readily available in Australia. Heidi McRae has an aggressive form of triple-negative breast cancer and says most people can't afford the $70,000 of treatment. She's self-funded.
Yeah, it's just appalling. I know of families who are selling their family home to pay for treatment for a loved one. And you just look at the pages of Give a Little. People are having to beg for money for life-saving drugs or rely on the Rotary or someone to pay.
The report shows there are 18 medicines that Australians have access to, but New Zealanders don't. To sport, and Dame Lisa Carrington says she had to bring her A-game to secure the K1 500 metres spot for this year's Canoe Racing World Championships. The 5-time Olympic gold medalist has won the third and deciding race of her duel with world champion Amy Fisher for the berth in Canada later this year. Carrington admits there were plenty of nerves and says the race was incredibly tough.
Amy is such a, awesome competitor. So, that race also means a lot to both of us. And I think, we had to both bring our A game with what we had. And definitely a really tough race.
This weekend's ANZ Netball Premiership match between the Southern Steel and the Tactics has been postponed for 3 days due to COVID. The match was to be played in Invercargill on Saturday, but will now go ahead on Tuesday. The Steel say they have just 2 fully fit players. New Zealand Rugby has posted its first profit in 5 years, revealing a $5.5 million profit for the past financial year. The NZR's revenue increased by $51 million to $189 million in 2021, primarily driven by increases in broadcasting revenue, sponsorship and licensing. Meanwhile, the Crusaders and All Blacks prop Joe Moody is out for the rest of the year after it was confirmed he needs surgery on a knee injury he suffered against the Blues earlier this month. And Liverpool has taken a step towards another Champions League football final with a commanding 2-0 win over Spanish club Villarreal at Anfield. The semi-final second leg is in Villarreal next Wednesday. That's the news.
A win for grounded Kiwis.
We're extremely delighted with the decision to have the recognition from the court.
More people speak out against the Rise Church.
He had righteous anger. He would be ripping into 15-year-old girls over the wrong lighting and grabbing young men by the collar.
And residents fight against the nasty smell in Christchurch.
You don't want to breathe because it's sickening, it makes you nauseous. It's other people's shit that you feel like you're eating.
Tune in to the sweet smell of morning report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Nick Trubridge. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Cloudy periods for Northland and occasional showers, possibly heavy. From Auckland to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, Coromandel Peninsula and the Central High Country. Mostly fine, isolated showers at times about northern Auckland, Great Barrier and Coromandel Peninsula. Partly cloudy for Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. A few showers about and north of Wairau. Marlborough and Nelson, partly cloudy, isolated showers mainly about the ranges, clearing early tomorrow. For Bulla and Westland, fine today, apart from a few showers between Hokitika and Westport. Cloudy periods tomorrow with isolated showers south of the glaciers. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine, apart from areas of morning and evening cloud or fog. Fine today in Fiordland, cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers about the fjords. And for Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. The time is 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Thanks, Evie. Kia ora, good evening. This is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Trubridge in for Lisa Owen. Fed up Christchurch residents at their wits' end fronted up to a meeting today to describe life living with the combined putrid stench from 2 council facilities. Bromley residents described not being able to have friends over or have a barbecue in the backyard because of the stink. Others broke down, saying they couldn't work or sleep as the persistent smell invades their homes. The problem began years ago with the city's organics processing plant, but has been compounded since the neighbouring wastewater plant was damaged in a fire last November. Frustrated residents told a council meeting today they won't go away until the stench does. The council has to remove the fire-damaged sewerage materials to get rid of most of the odour. which is expected to take around 7 more months. But that's not good enough for resident Katinka Visser, who relies on a mobility scooter. She says her friends don't want to visit anymore.
It's really hard to put in words what the stench smells like. It's shit. It's bad enough dealing with your own, but you can get away from it and close the door. This is everyone else's shit that we're dealing with. It's yuck, and the thing is, it's in your nose, you taste it, and you can't get away from it. It has to be sorted now, like yesterday. Not tomorrow, not in 6 months, now.
In the meantime, a council team has been set up to visit the area and report back every 2 weeks. But Miss Visser isn't sure how that will work.
I like the sound of it. In fact, I love the sound of it. But how are they going to choose the people who are going to maybe get the help? And they'll have to pull it from somewhere. It'd be good if they pulled it from some cycle lanes or something that is still to come in. But, or stadium or whatever still has to be built. I try not to keep up with it because it makes me so mad, and I just feel, I don't know what's the word, overwhelmed is a good word, but more that I'm not listened to. I did feel listened to today, but I hope they mean what they say.
Miss Visser says she is concerned the council won't deliver.
To me, timeline and what are those 2 words that I was thinking of? It's like, as soon as possible. What does that mean? You know, it needs to have been done yesterday and successful. They say the aerators are successful. To me, they're not. I don't notice any difference. The only difference that I notice is that I hardly ever smell the green waste anymore because the sewerage caps it completely.
But another Bromley resident, Vicky Walker, who broke down at the meeting, says she is somewhat relieved the council agreed in principle today to relocate the organic treatment plant.
I'm feeling a little bit listened to, but the proof is in what's laid out for us, really. I sort of, there's a lot of information in there, and yeah, I think we were heard. Proof's in the pudding, really.
And she has a warning for the council if it doesn't deliver on its promise.
We'll be back here again in a month, and we'll be wanting to hear what the outcome is of that. So, yeah, we're not going to go away easy.
And you can catch that piece filmed by our cameraman Nathan McKinnon online. Later in the program we'll hear from Christchurch Mayor Lianne Dalziel. But first, MP Tracy McClellan was at today's meeting where she called on Christchurch City Council to do the right thing. She joins us now from outside her electorate office, not far from the cause of the big stink. Tracy, thanks for joining us. First of all, how does it smell where you are at the moment?
Well, thank you for having me, Nick, and kia ora, everybody. Actually, right now it's not too bad. It's pretty busy with traffic, but I know this morning that when I caught up with people in my office, they were reporting some pretty horrendous experiences. Yeah, it's a constant thing. It depends on where the wind's blowing.
You've been down there a number of times, I imagine. They're your constituents, so you can't smell it at the moment, but tell us what it is like when you are there.
Well, I think we've got to be careful that there's 2 different smells, and as Katinka and Vicky both clearly articulated, we've got this horrendous stench from the wastewater plant, and we've got this much longer term, quite a different smell from the organics processing plant, and you know, they're both horrible in their own special way.
So how long has this been going on? You mentioned the organics plant first of all. How long has that been an issue down there?
It's been an issue for a number of years, and there's been some real stalwarts in this community who have been championing this for many, many years. And quite frankly, they haven't been listened to and they haven't been responded to. So for the council to make a decision today, in principle, but a decision nevertheless, that they will move this plant because it should not be in a residential area, I'm hoping that will give them some sort of peace of mind.
It's over a decade we're talking, isn't it, in terms of that organics plant?
It is.
Is that good enough? I mean, is that good enough? These residents have put up with this smell from that particular site for 10 years plus.
Absolutely, and it's not good enough, and I don't think that anybody would agree that it is. It's taken an awfully long time for the residents to be listened to be taken seriously, and credit where credit's due, this council has at least heard them, and they have heard them, and they've made a decision to move it. It's a first step, and I know just as much as anybody that making a decision doesn't actually move the plant. It certainly won't move overnight, but our job now, like Vicky said, is we're not going away. Our job is to be vigilant and to put the council on notice. They're on the clock, and we're going to keep watching until this plant is moved.
You mentioned today doing the right thing. What do you mean by that?
Doing the right thing to fix the community and stop trying to fix the plant. Over the last couple of years, there's been several suggestions about mitigating the operations of the plant, and that's all very well and good. But it's the community that needs to be fixed. The plant just needs to be moved.
Are you talking rates relief?
Oh, look, that's way outside my sphere and lane of operation, Nick, but, this council, the community certainly has suffered, and I'm hoping that the decision today at least is a step towards giving them a little bit of peace of mind.
But you must
while they deal with what...
Sure, sorry to interrupt, but you must have thought about some possible, whether it be rates relief, other mitigating things like that these residents could be up for.
Well, not personally, no, because again, that's outside sort of my sphere of operation, but I was heartened to hear at the council meeting today, I think Councillor Anne Galloway and Councillor Pauline Cotter talked about putting together a bit of a group in relation to the wastewater plant and looking at what sort of psychosocial help, what sort of relief, even if it's symbolic and just shows that they're being listened to and that what they're experiencing does matter and that there's some sort of reciprocity. I think that's a step forward as well.
Just on that group that you mentioned, that one that's going to visit and monitor the conditions down there and report back every 2 weeks, we heard one of the residents in that package before saying, not sure I've got much faith in this. Is this really what they're after? I mean, don't we know what the issues are already?
Sorry, a bus just went past and I didn't catch all of that, Nick. I think what you said, don't we already know what the problem is? I think what this group will do, now that an in-principle decision's been made, we have to make sure that things move on as quickly as possible. So the group will add value. I think it's a good idea. I think it's important that the community not just move away from a decision and go, okay, hopefully that'll work. I think that there needs to be some ongoing monitoring to make sure that they're part of the solution and they're absolutely up to date with how things move along from here.
Thanks, Tracy. That is Tracy McClellan there. She is MP for Banks Peninsula, talking about that stench that's been an issue for, well, in one sense, over a decade now in Christchurch, but still lingering away there. We would love to get your feedback on that. What do you think of the smell if you're in Christchurch? Can you smell it? What do you think council should do? You can text me 2101, you can tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. 4 children have been caught by police stealing from a Hamilton mall in the dead of night. Police say the children aged 7, 10, 11 and 12 were found at Chartwell Shopping Centre around 1 a.m. this morning. They say multiple alarms alerted police to the break-in. Hamilton City Area Commander Inspector Andrea Macbeth says toys were all they wanted.
They've been into a shop and identified a number of Nerf guns and other toys that children like and have essentially taken them for themselves.
And this was, this was middle of the night, really, wasn't it? 1 a.m. So have you managed to catch up with their parents? I mean, people are going to be hearing this, particularly that 7-year-old. They should have been at home in bed ready for school the next day. Have you spoken to the parents?
Yeah, for sure. What we happened on scene is we apprehended initially 3 of the young people. One of them ran away, and you'll be aware he subsequently sustained an injury from falling from a wall nearby. Once we apprehended all 4 of those young people, we've then got in touch with their guardians or parents, had conversations with them about what had taken place.
And what have they said when you've spoken to the parents? Were they aware that the kids were out?
Yeah, quite a mixed situation for the young people concerned. So in relation to some of the parents, they were not aware. And other parents were not in a suitable state to actually look after the children, which has potentially given them the opportunity to go and leave home at such an early hour of the morning, and that's led to the offending taking place. Some of those parents who we did talk to were very concerned and upset about what had taken place also.
What do you mean when you say some of these parents' guardians weren't in a position to look after these young ones?
So there are some difficult social factors in relation to the background for some of these young people. Some of the children come from difficult situations, poverty, and families where there are some addiction issues, or perhaps where looking after the child is not at the forefront of the priorities for the family. And in this case, sadly, there are some examples of that being one of the factors.
And so where are they now? Where are the kids now? Are they back home?
Youth aid referrals were done, and that is going to be ongoing in terms of follow-up to support the young person and their families. Police subsequently, after dealing with the incident, have taken the children, young people, back to appropriate guardians to look after them in their care. I understand one of the young people may still be in hospital, the young person who got injured.
Yeah, could you tell us more about that 11-year-old? What happened there exactly?
Sure. So the initial police staff who responded to the alarm activation identified the 4 young people and called them out of the premise. Upon doing that, one of those young persons has gone and run from the scene. The 2 staff have remained with the other young people, waiting for some more staffing resource to arrive. But then they've subsequently later on, when that's occurred, gone to see where the young person ran to and have located him nearby, and he'd fallen off a wall, quite a high wall, in his endeavour to escape from the police. He had an injury at that stage, so staff immediately gave the medical attention and got an ambulance to him, where he was taken to hospital.
How did they manage to get into the building?
They've caused a breach in one of the glass doors, which has enabled access into the building.
So did they drive in or?
No, this isn't, I guess, what you'd call the classic ram raid that has been seen through the media recently. This was more of an actual physical entry into the mall without a vehicle.
What do you think of all of this, Inspector? I mean, the ages are shocking, the youngest being 7. When this came across your desk, what did you think?
Yeah, shocking, absolutely right. The age, we have been dealing with ram raids for some period of time with young people. This age is next level concerning. These are really young children, and by all accounts, when they were apprehended by our staff, they saw them as young children, not something you'd class as, an offender out in the early hours of the morning off to do a burglary. They're kids who want toys. So this is a real problem. This is a really complex matter and a social issue. There's not one way for us to fix this. It requires a collective, all-of-community response.
It's 5:22. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nick Trubridge in for Lisa Owen. Cancer patients want the government to step up as many struggle to fund their own treatment. A report by the Cancer Control Agency has found 18 gold standard cancer medicines are funded by Australia but not New Zealand. That means more than 1,000 New Zealand cancer patients a year are missing out. Rosie Gordon spoke to those paying tens of thousands to stay alive.
Nikki Barlow has been a nurse for 20 years, working in both Australia and New Zealand. In 2019, the tables turned. She was diagnosed with advanced breast cancer. When it metastasised to her liver, her doctor put her on medication to extend her life, but it wasn't funded here.
We were trying to figure out how we could afford the $60,000+ for the 3-weekly cycle of treatment that I needed.
Ms Barlow says because the medication wasn't funded, she had to go to a private hospital, adding to the cost.
And you sit there and they give you the IV infusion and then they send you on your way. And that's essentially it. But that costs you about $1,400 every time.
Ms Barlow says it's sad New Zealand doesn't fund these kind of treatments that prolong cancer patients' lives.
It will impact on how long I live. So it's not just about feeling disappointed in the system, it's about I'm 49 years old and there's many people like me that will die a lot earlier than we need to because this is the funding isn't there to access these medications that extend your life. It is disappointing and it is quite scary, really.
Heidi McRae was diagnosed with an aggressive form of triple-negative breast cancer last September. She too funded her own treatment, a medication called Keytruda, to the tune of $69,000. Keytruda is funded in Australia, but only for some cancers. Ms McRae says it's grossly unfair patients are missing out on medication because of the cost.
Yeah, it's just appalling. I know of families who are selling their family home to pay for treatment for a loved one. And you just look at the pages of Give a Little. People are having to beg for money for life-saving drugs or rely on the Rotary or someone to pay.
Steve Ioane is one of those with a Give a Little page. The father of 4 had worked as a police officer for 17 years when he was recently diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Mr Ioane needs Keytruda but can't afford it. He's currently undergoing treatment, so his best mate, Akire Maricela Thompson, is acting as a spokesperson.
Steve is somebody that's never been to hospital other than the birth of his four kids. I don't know as a friend which was worse, to be hit with this news or to be hit with the fact that our country doesn't even fund this type of treatment.
A treatment which is estimated to cost around $120,000 for 11 sessions. The Give a Little page has raised $38,000. Maricela Thompson fears if they can't find the money, his friend won't survive.
If he can't pay for it himself, then there's chances of fighting and surviving this. And seeing his young kids grow up is very, very dire. It's already dire statistically at the moment. He's on stage 4, knocking on heaven's door, really.
Oncologist Chris Jackson says the report out today proves New Zealand has a poor level of access to cancer drugs. The Cancer Society says now's the time for the government to act. Nikki Barlow agrees.
They need to do better. They need to do better by people like me. They need to do better with their funding because we're people that we're young, we're part of families, and we should be able to access the treatments that Australians can access.
Health Minister Andrew Little says that Pharmac will consider the report and there may be more money allocated for cancer drugs in the budget next month. He also says the government is looking to do more.
There's been an unexpected upside to the whole COVID experience. With tourists unable to visit, more Kiwis have been taking advantage of their wonderful backyard. DOC has released its summer visitor insights showing that in the last 2 years, 3 out of every 4 New Zealanders visited outdoor conservation areas. The visitor numbers were recorded at popular sites, huts, campsites and walking tracks in the 3 months from December last year to the end of February this year. DOC's Heritage and Visitors Director Tim Bamford joins me now. Good afternoon, Tim.
Good afternoon, Nick. How are you?
Very well, thank you. What do these numbers tell us about, I guess the sorts of places people want to go?
Oh, it's really exciting to see the majority of New Zealanders got into the outdoors. As you said, 3 or 4 out of 3 of 4 New Zealanders got into the outdoors. It's mainly coastal areas and bush areas within sort of an hour or 2 hours drive from urban populations.
In terms of, there was a bit of a drop-off this summer compared to last. What do you put that down to? Is it Auckland lockdown? What are you thinking?
Yeah, there was a slight drop from last year. I think that's reflecting the Omicron outbreak and people staying at home. To be honest, we're kind of surprised as much activity as there was. We still saw a lot of people getting into the outdoors, and I think that goes to show that people love to get out for the peace and quiet, spend time with their friends and families, and it's being in the fresh outdoors. It's a good way in this current context to see other people and get some fresh air.
And what are people saying? Obviously, we're not getting the feedback from overseas visitors at the moment. Do you hear from Kiwis, this hut and this walk needed fixing up?
We absolutely get a range of feedback. Most people love their experience. They enjoy using the booking system. People who go on the Great Walks absolutely love them. It's been good to see 50% more Kiwis getting onto Great Walks than before COVID. So, yeah, a few things here and there, but overwhelmingly positive feedback.
What would you recommend? Any specific spots that you hit over the summer? Any walks that we should be checking out?
The classic iconic spots right now, unfortunately for those communities, are quieter, but it's a great time to check out those Kiwi gems like Punakaiki, Pancake Rocks, Franz Joseph Glacier and Milford. And then there's also some phenomenal great walks close to home, like in Wellington. The Rongorongo Valley is a great place to go with your kids, and there's a lot of huts there if you want to go with friends and family.
Were you surprised to see the concerns there from people about catching COVID or about others following the rules?
Didn't feel like other people would follow the rules and catching COVID, and roughly or over 10% of Kiwis indicated that they wouldn't use dock facilities under the current settings. That just really reinforces to use good hygiene and just be considerate when you go out and into our great outdoors.
Thank you, Tim. That was Tim Bamford there from Department of Conservation. Kia ora, you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. E Haere nei, a stinging rebuke for Christchurch Council as locals detail the horrors of living with the stench from their waste plant. Primary school-aged kids, the latest ram raiders. And coming up, who's facing a rate hike? And what will the money be used for? Don't forget you can text us on 2101 and you can tweet us at checkpointrnz, Facebook us, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Now it's time for the headlines with Evie.
The High Court in Auckland is urging iwi involved in a land dispute to resolve it out of court. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei's declaration of being recognised as sole mana whenua in parts of Tamaki Makaurau has been declined. Justice Palmer has made a number of recommendations on how to resolve overlapping land settlements. The Christchurch City Council claims there are no health concerns from a putrid smell in Bromley, but residents say they're getting sick. Locals say they've had to put up with an appalling stench from a fire-damaged sewage treatment plant for 6 months. Air quality specialists from Hamilton are now in Canterbury to monitor the odour. The Bay of Plenty District Health Board is promising to address seclusion issues at 2 of its mental health facilities. Follow-up visits at Te Toki Maurere in Whakatāne and Te Whare Maiangiangi in Tauranga last year found overcrowding and continuing high rates of seclusion, particularly for Māori patients. The DHB says it accepts the findings and has provided action plans. The police say 4 children who broke into a Hamilton shopping mall came from backgrounds that included poverty and addiction issues with family members. The children, aged between 7 and 12, broke into the Chartwell shopping mall and stole toys, including plastic guns. Hamilton City Area Commander Inspector Andrea Macbeth says their parents were either unaware their kids were out or were not in a state to care for them. There are 9,047 new community cases of COVID-19 and 13 further deaths have been reported. There are also nearly 54,000 active cases of the virus. Meanwhile, another COVID medication is now available with the arrival of the antiviral drug Molnupiravir. It comes in tablet form and can be taken at home. And it could take up to 6 weeks to renew a passport. Internal Affairs says the problem is being caused by high demand, coinciding with unplanned staff absences. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thank you, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. Time for the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, business confidence remains deeply pessimistic. Tell us about the latest survey results.
Well, we could be just pulling out the one from last time and saying pretty much the same thing because it's pretty much the same story. Businesses are still deeply pessimistic about the outlook. They're expecting strong inflation. They're concerned about a slowing housing market and what effect that might have on consumers. So, yeah, the broader economy is expected to deteriorate. That's a net 42% expect that. That's a high number. They're also expecting inflation, and although price expectations have eased a little bit, we're in for a really rough period if these numbers are anything to go by. So, yeah, expect this to be, I don't know what's going to make any change. It's a story about COVID still, and Omicron. Those are the same stories we keep hearing, so it's not happy. Businesses aren't happy.
Still pretty grim, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Good Spirits, a lot of Aucklanders will know them. They own a few bars around town. Their expansion plans have failed for a second time. What's gone on this time?
Well, it's the old ugly COVID again, striking into investors' confidence. So while they did have investment confidence here to buy Nourish Group, which is the owner of a number of high-end restaurants in Auckland, for example, they own Soul and the Jervois Steakhouse. They also own the Jervois Steakhouse in Queenstown. That deal is off because the investors they were counting on from overseas couldn't come to check out the restaurants, sample the fare as they speak, and no, they decided to pull out, so they're not buying. And that meant that the financing arrangements fell through too. That's the second time that the deal has been thwarted. Last year, Good Spirits tried to buy 3 bars. They walked away from that deal too for similar reasons. Not enough customers as a result of COVID closures and so on.
Yeah, not good.
No.
Spin us around the markets.
Yeah, well, that's a better story for you.
Good.
Okay, so the top 50 index, it rose 1.25% today, which is great because yesterday we had a pretty awful day. Up 149 points to 11,875. New Zealand dollar story's a little bit different. It depends on which side. If you're an exporter, you'll be super happy to hear that the New Zealand dropped below 65 US cents today to 64.9 is what it's trading at the moment. And that's really a big dollar story, that the US dollar is at its highest level in about 2 decades. So it's hard for us to do anything about that. It's nothing that we're doing. It's all about the US there. And 91.5 Australian, which is fairly steady, and 51.9 pence.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news there. Aucklanders may need to pay higher rates to deal with the financial trouble the council is facing. Last year, Auckland Council agreed to cap annual rates rises at 3.5% for the next 10 years. But today's pre-election report warns the council's coffers are not looking good. What's being spent is increasing at a faster rate than what's coming in. Auckland Council Chief Executive Jim Stabbock joins me now. Jim, what needs to happen for Council to get on top of this then?
Oh, good afternoon, Nick. How are you? Thanks for the opportunity. Look, the way you framed that is correct. Auckland Council's revenue has been pretty significantly impacted by COVID. And of course, we all understand what sorts of cost pressures we're facing as a community, and as an organisation, we're no different to that. So inflation is having an impact on the cost of services provided by council. At the end of the day, those two things have to reconcile, and it'll be up to council and councillors to be able to make choices to balance our budget.
So I've been reading through this report this afternoon, Jim, and on one hand you say we're going to have to look at decreasing services, but other parts of the report say things like we might need to look at it, we need to look at increasing bus services in places with unmet need. How do those two things stack up?
So we've set out in that report, Nick, 3 broad challenges. The first of those is addressing climate action. And we've set some ambitious targets, and we know we need to spend more money to really have an impact on carbon reduction in line with those ambitions. The second challenge is that we've said that there are challenges in relation to equity across Auckland and making sure that services are able to be accessed equitably by Aucklanders. And of course, overarching both of those things is our obligation to fund and finance council in a way that's sustainable, and make sure that our costs are in line with our ability to raise revenue. Revenue is a function of a number of things. Rates is one of those. Of course, that's one of the choices that councillors will have. on the other side of the equation, we always have choices about how we might deliver services differently to manage within our cost envelopes.
So Council said last year to expect 3.5% rates increase over the next 10 years. Of course, we know the most recent one was 5. 3.5, is that viable for the rest of the decade?
Well, this is the essence of the challenge, Nick. You know, we're facing inflation pressures of 7% or so, and that's, we can see that pressure being maintained into the kind of near to mid-term future. That sets our cost trajectory, to grow faster than the rate of income, which is largely a function of rates. And so, once again, these are decisions for an incoming council to make in relation to do we make adjustments to revenue on the rates side, or do we make adjustments to costs and the services that are delivered as a function? And of course, the right answer, or the answer at the end of the day, might be a combination of those things.
In terms of services being cut, Jim, what sorts of things might get the red pen through them?
Well, again, these are questions for an incoming council to consider. I don't really want to speculate on the sorts of services. Of course, council provides a really diverse range of things, but we have set out a set of criteria against which we could evaluate services, right from on the one end of that spectrum or continuum, the things that are required for us to do by law, right through to the other end where the services that are provided might not align to our priorities or the requirements of Aucklanders or deliver value in the same way that they used to, or can be provided by an alternative supplier in the market, right, where we might say, well, actually others can do this, it's no longer necessary if a council can do it. To do it, we should consider whether we continue that service or not.
Would selling off golf courses help?
Well, we don't always have that option. Nick, of course, they're important assets. We have had a program in place of selling what we've called non-strategic assets, so assets, sometimes land and property, that's not used by council for any strategic purpose. Council does, of course, own a number of golf courses, and they are leased to golf course operators on different terms and over different periods of time. They are one of a number of strategic assets that we own, or important assets that are, service assets used by the community, and it's for councillors to consider how those golf courses and other assets get used over time.
So it's the pre-election report, right? So what advice would you give to, a Fesso Collins, Leo Malloy, Viv Beck, Craig Lord?
Well, again, Nick, that is the point of the report. It sets out the challenges that an incoming council, including an incoming mayor, will have to take into account and consider in the next term of council. And, of course, there are some challenges in there in dealing with climate action and dealing with growth and making sure we've got a sustainable funding and financing pathway. And at the moment, as we look into the midterm and look into the next electoral term, of course, there are some things that we're going to have to change in order to make the council's accounts balance in a sustainable way.
Thank you, Jim. That is Jim Stabbock there. He is CEO of Auckland Council. Right, staying in the super city where 5 Auckland suburbs are getting a cash injection to make them build ready for 16,000 homes. $1.4 billion will be pumped into Mount Roskill, Mangere, Tamaki, Oranga and Northcote, although experts warn it won't happen fast. Katie Todd reports.
Fronting media alongside the Housing Minister this morning, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff was keen to show his excitement.
If it wasn't for COVID, I'd turn around and I'd hug the minister, but we're keeping a social distance.
As the government unveiled plans to splash the cash on 400 urban renewal projects on 5 sites in Mount Roskill, Mangere, Tamaki, Oranga and Northcote. The money comes from the $3.8 billion Housing Acceleration Fund. It's something Auckland Council has been eager for. When the government announced plans to tweak zoning rules last year, Phil Goff retorted saying infrastructure was the real problem they needed to tackle, along with supply chain challenges and a skilled worker shortage.
We are now making up for the absence of investment in infrastructure over decades, and this is what Tamaki Makaurau desperately needs. A fantastic occasion for us to celebrate.
The money's intended to get the sites build ready for higher density housing. That means stormwater upgrades, decontamination work and better transport options, making it viable to construct 16,000 new homes. More than a third will be social housing. 4,000 old Kāinga order homes will be bowled and rebuilt, plus another 2,000 new ones, then 10,000 affordable and market-priced homes. But what about those other hurdles, the lack of construction materials and workers? That's something CoreLogic's chief property economist Kelvin Davidson has an eye on.
That's another question. There's got to be some doubts about that. We know that construction industry is pretty much running at capacity, and we've had 50,000 dwelling consents in total across the country in the past year. Maybe the industry can only actually handle about 30 or 35,000 new houses on the ground.
Auckland property developer David Whitburn says he's keeping his expectations realistic in terms of how long it will take for both the infrastructure and the eventual homes to arrive.
It's going to take a long time to get the infrastructure in and probably cost a fair bit more, which is one of the reasons that will be frustrating this. So I'm not expecting these houses to be built anytime soon.
The government's put a 5 to 16 year time frame on the plan, and David Whitburn thinks that's fair. Housing Minister Megan Woods says there are enough workers, saying that's proven in the completion of other building projects like the Peretahi Alliance.
In terms of the supply chain shortages, we know there are some constraints on the market at the moment, but that is not a reason for us to stop doing the preparatory work we need to do to continue to build houses. New Zealand simply does not have enough houses.
Kelvin Davidson agrees any investment that enables housing in the future is a good thing. And the government's being praised for building up, enabling so-called brownfields development on existing land rather than expanding onto new land in the city fringe. David Whitburn says it keeps the long-term infrastructure costs down, and considering Auckland's large urban footprint, it's a win for the environment.
It's just about doing the right thing and thinking about this for future generations. Te Tao, our natural environment, is absolutely crucial, and I think we have to try to be mindful as a city how we grow.
It's hoped the infrastructure work will eventually enable another 11,000 new homes to be built on surrounding privately owned land.
Dealing with Christchurch's bog of eternal stench has taken almost a decade and a half and will cost tens of millions of dollars. Today the council agreed in principle to relocate the organics processing plant in Bromley to an alternative location. But dealing with the double whammy odour wafting from Bromley's fire-ravaged wastewater plant is a different matter. Christchurch Mayor Lianne Dalziel has been listening to residents' concerns today.
There are two smells that we're talking about. I haven't had the direct impact of the organics plant, but perhaps if we focus on the impact that I've now described as the stench coming from the wastewater treatment plant, that is the impact of the fire on November 1st. It was a catastrophic fire, and the smell is awful. Absolutely awful, and it's having a huge impact on the neighbourhood.
Yeah, because as you point out, there are sort of two issues at play here, aren't there? There's obviously the organics plant and then the wastewater treatment plant. Let's start with the organics processing plant. Okay. 14 years of complaints. Why so long to have a decision in principle to shift it?
Well, look, it has been a bit of a journey, and I acknowledge one of the councillors who said today that he is the only one that was there at the time that the original decision was made to build the plant there, and and even he abstained from that rather than voting against it because, and in fact, I haven't talked to him about why that was the case. This issue, though, about the impact that it was having on the community was brought to our attention probably around 2015, 2016 as we were heading into our long-term planning processes. And I guess that the issue for us here was the role of the regulator. The regulator is Environment Canterbury. We hold a resource consent that requires the operator of Living Earth to control the odour at the boundary. Now, in order for us to act, we needed to have what the regulator has finally done this year, and that was to issue an abatement notice. All of the advice that we received from ECAN at that time suggested that there were multiple sources of the odours that were occurring in the Bromley area, and they did not nail it down to living earth. And I guess that my sort of expression that I want to give to the residents, having heard from them, not just today, but on earlier occasions, is that there is now a very clear acceptance of the need for change, and the vote that we had today was to agree, in essence, to move the plant.
And, you only have to hear some of the submissions from some of the residents today. I've got a note here saying some felt like they were bullied. There's a Michael Williams here who says he can't have friends over for barbecues. Another resident saying they can taste it when they're talking. It's revolting, makes sleeping impossible. Is any of this really acceptable to you? I mean, yes, there is the Environment Canterbury piece of this, but it has been going on for over a decade.
Yeah, look, these are two different issues, and the submissions that we heard today and what you've just quoted is quotes from the two different issues. So it is absolutely true that with the wastewater treatment plant and the stench that the fire has caused there, that is absolutely it is an environment that is intolerable for the people who live there, and we are working to resolve that as quickly as we can.
Sorry, Ms. Dalziel, now that you have mentioned the wastewater plant and of course the fire last November, what is the timeline for a resolution on that?
I think that the issue that we had today was to get in front of everyone the sort of that full image of the time frame. So and what we heard today was all of the detail of all the work that has been going on since the fire. And actually that fire burned until November the 25th. It was declared as over on that date. So it was a substantial amount of damage that was done. There was an opportunity for councillors to ask questions of staff and public, and we had everyone there from the technical advice, health and safety, insurance, communications, and every single one of those disciplines was at the meeting. We had an excellent presentation, and as I said, the opportunity to ask and have answered those questions in public. And I guess that the next steps, and what was made very clear, was that we've got a contractor into a direct negotiation with the council. The contractor will be announced next week, and the contractor is absolutely on board with the sense of urgency for addressing the issues. That's why we've used this phrase of 3 to 7 months on the basis of how long will it take, 4 to 7 months, which is how long does it take to do each of the trickling filters, because these are massive structures. They're 55 metres in diameter, and they're 3 stories tall. So that they're both massive structures. How long does it take to get the stuff out of there? Can we do them both at the same time, or do they have to be done one after the other? And these are the issues that they're talking through with the contractor to get a methodology in there to do this as fast as we can, recognising that there'll be a workforce that needs to be kept safe, and of course the environmental impacts of what is hazardous substance that's already in there, and potentially other hazardous substances that emerge from any other treatments that are brought into play.
So is there anything else you can do for residents down there? I mean, a resolution is still a wee way away. They can't use their backyards, for example. They can't use their backyards because of issues related to a council asset. Is there anything else you can do for these people? Rates relief, compensation? Are you looking at anything like that?
Well, we raised the question of the impact that this was having on the well-being of residents, particularly those that are nearby. And so what we decided today was that there would be a, front-facing public reporting process every 2 weeks. So every fortnight there'll be a report in front of either a council meeting or the Finance and Performance Committee meeting. For the next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks' time, it'll be a council meeting, and staff have been asked to come back with recommendations on how we address some of these wellbeing issues
understand that. Sorry to interrupt, but in terms of immediate relief, the next few weeks, is there anything you can do? Is rates relief an option?
But as I say, in the next 2 weeks, we will have a report back to Council, which will consider what the options might be to resolve these things. So yes, so we can act quickly in response to that report. But we do want to go away and talk to other agencies. There's a meeting with the DHB next week, and other matters like that. But we do want to put together some options that Council can actually consider. And by way of, what are the ways that we could address some of the psychosocial concerns that have been so clearly expressed to us today.
Christchurch Mayor Lianne Dalziel there, and we're getting, an absolute stream of feedback on this issue of the stench in Christchurch. One person writes, I live in Linwood, maybe 2 kilometres away from the settling ponds as the crow flies. The putrid smell is unbearable, this person says. No one should have to put up with this assault on their lives. It needs to be dealt with like any major national incident. We have had earthquakes, the dreadful mosque attack, then COVID, and now this. It needs to be a national priority. Thank you, Juliet. I have just driven down Linwood Avenue through Bromley, and it stinks. No ratepayer should have to live with that stench. Shame on you, Christchurch City Council and DCAN. The putrid stench drifts over a large part of the city now. And that's true, because I know someone who lives in Avonhead, which for those who don't know is way up north west of the city. Apparently he could smell it there the other day. Back in Sydenham, this person says, every time it's an easterly wind, which is often been... they can smell it every time there's an easterly wind, which is often. It's been bad there since the fire, Francis says. So keep your feedback coming on that. You can text us 2101. Can you smell it at your place? It was world champion versus Olympic medalist in the battle to represent New Zealand in the K1 500 metres at the World Canoe Sprint Championships. Locked at 1-1, the best of 3 internal trials between Amy Fisher and Dame Lisa Carrington drew a crowd for the decider. Sports reporter Felicity Reid and camera operator Marika Habazi were at Lake Karapiro to watch the action.
The wind picked up, the applause rang out, and Dame Lisa Carrington rose to the occasion once again. In the winner-takes-all showdown, Carrington crossed the finish line 0.61 seconds, or about half a boat length, ahead of reigning K1 500-metre world champion Amy Fisher. The victory secured Carrington's place at the World Championships in August, but after losing to Fisher by 8 milliseconds in the first trial race on Saturday, Carrington knew she'd have to push.
I think it was a big wake-up call, and I think, we were at such tight racing that every stroke counts. So it's a really good reminder that when you go out there, you just got to turn up on the line knowing that, you've got a tough competitor racing against you. But ultimately, it's just got to make both of us faster.
Both athletes say the K1 500 metre is a distance that means a lot to them, and today's final caused Fisher some anxiety.
I can't even describe, how I felt before the race, and all the nerves, all the sleepless nights. And she's brought out the best in me, I think we bring out the best in each other out there, and it's a pretty epic battle. And I'd say that series will be some of the racing of the decade.
Battling with the tailwind, Fisher explains how she came unstuck when it mattered most.
I thought I had some momentum on my side, and I got a wobble of all wobbles at the end, to the point where I saw myself falling in, kind of thing. But hey, these things happen, and it was so tricky in that last part. I think we both had a couple of, back and forth, so I'll be sure to go back home and practice some more in rough conditions.
Fisher stepped away from the high-performance environment before the Tokyo Olympics, citing concerns around athlete welfare. Despite finishing second today, Fisher believes she is in the right place.
I love my team. I love where I'm at and the environment I'm in, and I think I'll be staying here.
Without the World Champs to focus on, Fisher says she'll take a month off. However, Carrington was straight back on the water at Lake Karapiro today for trials in the K2. She'll link up with some emerging athletes, some of who watched her from the stands this morning.
It has to be good for the sport and for, the girls that we'll be trialling with today and the next few days. So I think it's just an exciting time for the sport.
For all of the emerging talent in the New Zealand kayaking program, neither Fisher or Carrington have ruled out teaming up in the K2 sometime in the future. And Carrington has fond memories of their former partnership.
I think in the past, I've paddled with Amy, trained with Amy, and she's an awesome teamboat paddler, and I think for her, she's doing such an amazing job with what she's doing. So I think she's just got to keep charging.
But now it's Carrington doing the charging towards Nova Scotia, Canada, for the World Championships, and a chance to retain the world title she won in 2015 and 2019, and keeping Kiwi athletes at the top of the world.
A little bit more of your feedback now before the news. First of all, on this issue of the lack of funding for cancer drugs in New Zealand, we've got an email here. Shocking disparity in cancer treatment between NZ and Oz. But it's simple, really, isn't it? Tax cuts or healthcare, this person says. The government is prepared to fund bureaucracy such as Three Waters and the Māori Health Authority, but they do little to help individual people in need. Great in theory, short in practicality and substance, says Kevin in Napier. A little bit on ram raids here as well. No more ram raids equals bollard installation, with vehicles parked strategically in the interim, and a couple more on waste as well. As I said earlier, a person's written in saying they can smell it way over the other side of town in Avonhead. Another says, I agree, the stench is terrible, the council are useless and not doing anything about it.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. A Christchurch MP hopes the City Council's promise to look into moving the Bromley organics processing plant gives locals some peace of mind. Council staff have been asked to find possible new sites for the plant, which turns green waste into compost after years of complaints about the smell. Banks Peninsula MP Tracy McClellan told Checkpoint people feel like they haven't been listened to, but the council deserves credit for the decision.
For the council to make a decision today, in principle, but a decision nevertheless that they will move this plant because it should not be in a residential area, I'm hoping that will give them some sort of peace of mind.
Bromley residents have also pleaded with the council to do more to stop the stench from the suburb's fire-damaged wastewater treatment plant. City Councillor Jani Johansson has called for a disaster response to the problem. Hamilton police are describing a break-in involving 4 children at a mall overnight as concerning. They ranged in age between 7 and 12 and were caught with stolen toys at the Chartwell Mall in the early hours of the morning. Hamilton City Area Commander Inspector Andrea Macbeth says some of the parents weren't aware they were out or not in a state to look after them. She says the case is particularly worrying because it involved a child as young as 7.
This age is next level concerning. These are really young children. They're kids who want toys. So this is a real problem. This is a really complex matter and a social issue.
The children have been referred to Youth Aid. A Muslim advocacy group has welcomed a report that's identified white supremacy as the leading driver of online extremism. The Department of Internal Affairs has released its first annual report on the content it investigated in 2021. It shows white supremacy ideology accounts for by far the largest portion of extreme online content. Federation of Islamic Associations Chair Abdul Razak says it confirms what the Muslim community already knows.
We know the right-wing extremism has increased, and the data from Australia, data from New Zealand, data from everywhere has been there. Unfortunately, many of our policymakers are still in the old mindset. They have to be in the future mindset, and that is this report hopefully will do.
Abdul Razak says the findings confirm the need for hate speech law reform. Another COVID medication is now available to New Zealanders. A shipment of the drug Molnupiravir arrived in Auckland today. The antiviral drug is in tablet form, which means it can be taken at home and reduces the chances of someone becoming seriously unwell with COVID. It's the 5th antiviral drug available in New Zealand, but health experts say the best defence against the virus is still vaccination. The Bay of Plenty District Health Board is promising to address the high rates of seclusion at 2 of its mental health facilities. The high rates, particularly for Māori, were uncovered in 2018 during Ombudsman inspections at the units in Whakatane and Tauranga. Follow-up visits last year found the problems hadn't been solved. The DHB says it accepts the findings and has provided action plans. It says a business case to replace the Whakatane unit is a top priority. The British Foreign Secretary says Russian forces must be pushed out of the whole of Ukraine. In a speech in London, Liz Truss described a victory for Ukraine as a strategic imperative for the West. Here's the BBC's James Landale.
Western powers are turning their minds to how the war in Ukraine might end and what they want beyond a cessation of hostilities. In her speech, Liz Truss said Russia had to be pushed out of the whole of Ukraine. That is the clearest statement yet of Britain's war aims and implies Russian forces must leave not just the territory occupied in recent weeks, but also those areas invaded 8 years ago, such as the Crimea. The Foreign Secretary also made clear the West should do more to deter future Russian aggression by spending more on defence and using its economic clout to exclude Russia from Western markets.
And a property economist says the government's plans to pump $1.4 billion into infrastructure in Auckland is a good way to use existing land more effectively. The funding will enable up to 16,000 homes to be built on sites in Mount Roskill, Mangere, Tāmaki, Oranga and Northcote over the next 5 to 16 years. CoreLogic's chief property economist, Kelvin Davidson, warns the construction could be delayed by supply chain challenges and a skilled worker shortage, but he says it's a significant investment.
I think it's got to be a good thing. We need infrastructure and we need to use our existing land better, intensifying the existing housing stock. So I think it has to be a good thing, and it's just part of the wider progress that's been made in Auckland in recent years.
The money for the project will come from the $4 billion Housing Acceleration Fund. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, I'll be looking to the night skies with astronomer and former Mount John Observatory Superintendent Alan Gilmore. And on Our Changing World, Alison Ballance, one of the Kakapo's biggest fans, brings us an update on how the 2022 breeding season is going. And our overseas correspondent in Taiwan, William Yang, joins us from Taipei. That's Nights with me, Charlotte Ryan, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Nick Trubridge next. Right now, though, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Cloudy periods in Northland and occasional showers, possibly heavy. From Auckland to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, Coromandel and the Central High Country. Mostly fine, isolated showers at times about northern Auckland, Great Barrier and the Coromandel Peninsula. Partly cloudy for Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waded Upper. A few showers about and north of Wairua. Looking to the South Island, Marlborough and Nelson, partly cloudy. Isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. They're clearing early tomorrow. Fine today for Bulla and Westland, apart from a few showers between Hokitika and Westport. Cloudy periods tomorrow with isolated showers south of the glaciers. Fine also for Canterbury, Otago and Southland, apart from areas of morning and evening cloud or fog. Fine today for Fiordland, cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers about the fjords, and for the Chatham Islands, Rekuhu, cloudy periods and a few showers. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint. I'm Nick Trowbridge. TikTok's no longer a platform for dance moves or mocking your mum. It's become the place to catch the latest crime being carried out. Recent ram raids have been captured on camera, and police say social media is a motivator for the young people behind the wheel. They say they're talking to the social media companies, but just what can be done about it? Well, joining us now is technology expert Paul Spain. Good evening, Paul. How responsive in the past have these social media companies been to, I suppose, putting an end to this sort of content as it shows up?
Probably not very good with this type of content. There is certain content that is so extreme that they work very hard to remove it. But they do have, quite significant challenges in terms of their own teams and resources to be able to go through and filter out content. The limits of artificial intelligence to actually carry out that work on an automated basis, and then it comes down to their internal approach and policies with what they do and don't want to share. And we're talking about content here that's probably pretty viral and actually helps make the money, helps make TikTok successful.
So in terms of what can be put in place to stop this, a combination of checking manually plus checking through technology, is that pretty much it?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a level of which users can feed back on most social media platforms and report content that is considered unacceptable. But if the platform itself doesn't consider the content unacceptable, then it's not going to go away. And of course, we've got media outlets, New Zealand's national media outlets that are sharing this footage through their own accounts onto TikTok. Which do they leave on and take off? And is this outside of their current rules? And it probably isn't.
So are we basically reliant on A, people reporting it, B, meeting the threshold, in this case from TikTok, to be removed?
Yeah, at this point in time, because it's not something we've got legislation that says that it can't go on air. We're not talking about the extremes that we saw in Christchurch. It's more that I think there's that interest in, well, if youngsters are getting involved in these ram raids because they see them, then maybe they would stop if we didn't show them. But is that a good enough reason to actually stop showing the content? I don't know. Who decides that? Certainly, I don't think there's any legislation to that effect.
Well, that was my next question. Could legislation be introduced? I suppose you have to be a little bit careful about how far that legislation goes, what it does block. But could the government do something? Maybe, but where do you draw those lines? Do we want to be Russia? Do we want to be China? How much do we have a freedom for sharing of content on these platforms? There are situations where legislation is appropriate, and we've seen European Union, we've seen Australia, making moves around certain aspects of social media and putting legislation. But there isn't a huge amount of legislation that's really relevant to these platforms at this point in time. Are social media companies, are they responsive to this kind of thing, or do they need to sort of be dragged to the table, so to speak?
It's a good question, and we don't necessarily get a lot of feedback from the platforms themselves. With Christchurch and the Christchurch call, sure, we had a situation there where Facebook, they really engaged, but that was at the extreme end of the scale. But otherwise, we don't tend to hear a lot from social media companies, and TikTok, as far as I'm aware, don't have a huge presence, if any, actually on the ground here in New Zealand. So I'm not quite sure, how easy that would be to get a response.
Thank you, Paul. Technology expert Paul Spain there on, of course, this issue of people posting ram raids on TikTok. White supremacy, meanwhile, continues to be the leading driver of extreme illegal online content in Aotearoa. That's the key finding out of the Department of Internal Affairs' first annual report on online extremism. A Muslim advocacy group is applauding the report, saying it confirms the need for stronger hate speech laws. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
The report summarises work carried out by a dedicated group, the Digital Violent Extremism Team at Internal Affairs in 2021. It investigated more than 600 URLs or links to extreme content. In a breakdown of the illegal content, white supremacy was found to be the biggest driver and often linked to the March 15 terror attacks. Federation of Islamic Associations Chair Abdur Razak says it's a wake-up call.
For me and for our community, it's a major wake-up call. It's a wake-up call for policymakers, for politicians and the public. And I think the DIA needs to be congratulated for this really what I would call a very insightful report, which adds considerable value.
The report is, in part, a result of the Christchurch Call, a dedicated global effort to fight online extremism after the March 15 massacre. It aims to give the New Zealand public a yearly snapshot of the volume and type of extreme online content flagged with Internal Affairs and what they do about it. Internal Affairs Director of Digital Safety, Jared Mullins, says the success in taking down content on platforms varies. Mr Mullins says while the likes of Twitter generates the biggest volume of extreme content, it's also the most responsive in taking it down. He says it's the smaller platforms that are the hardest to deal with.
Particularly some of those that have been established more as a haven for extreme ideas and extreme speech, where quite often, our approaches will go unheeded. And in those circumstances, what we've been able to do is work with authorities overseas.
Mr Mullin won't name and shame sites that refuse to take down extreme material, but is alluding to the likes of BitChute, a UK video hosting service known for accommodating far-right individuals, conspiracy theories and hate speech. The DAA report shows BitChute had the highest amount of objectionable content it couldn't remove. Mr Mullins says he still considers the program a success.
I think we are making a difference to the online safety of New Zealanders. And more than that, I think we're able to be a line in the sand, a bit of a yardstick, an official yardstick about what's acceptable and what's not.
Abdur Razak says the report's findings strengthen the case for change, including introducing hate speech laws.
We know the right-wing extremism has increased, and the data from Australia, data from New Zealand, data from everywhere has been there. Unfortunately, many of our policymakers are still in the old mindset. They have to be in the future mindset, and that is this report hopefully will do.
The government has proposed hate speech law reforms, but is yet to commit to passing them before the next year's election.
It's 6:15. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. President Vladimir Putin is warning Russia will respond immediately to any country attempting to interfere with the war in Ukraine. Mr. Putin says he has all the tools to respond and he had already chosen his likely approach. The EU has accused Moscow of economic blackmail and escalating the war by cutting gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg has more.
The Venice of the North, they call it. It was Peter the Great who built St. Petersburg to make Russia look and feel European. Today, though, the gulf between Russia and Europe is growing ever wider. In a St. Petersburg palace, the president,
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
Vladimir Putin was addressing lawmakers. From them, a sign of loyalty, the letter Z, symbol of Russia's offensive in Ukraine. From him, A warning to Ukraine's Western allies.
If anyone from the outside intends to interfere in what's happening, then they should know this. If they create threats for us, threats of a strategic nature, our retaliation, our counterstrike will be instantaneous. We have all the necessary instruments, ones that no one else can boast of. All the decisions on this have already been taken.
Across town, another decision announced. State energy giant Gazprom had shut off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria. An escalation condemned across Europe. The European Union has accused Russia of using gas as an instrument of blackmail. It said that was unjustified and unacceptable. But Russia is unrepentant. In fact, the Speaker of Parliament here said, "Good, let's cut off the gas now to all countries who are hostile to Russia." Talking of hostile, Russia continued to attack Ukraine, here with cruise missiles. There are Russians who oppose this operation, but public protest is dangerous. Sasha Skochilenko knows that. She's been charged with spreading fake news about the Russian army. She's accused of replacing supermarket price tags with anti-war messages. For that, she faces up to 10 years in prison. Sonia, her partner, believes it's a case that says so much about Russia.
What this tells us is that freedom of speech in our country is being stamped out. Political repression has got worse, and that people who are against the war are being persecuted and put in prison.
What those in power here demand is unflinching support for the offensive in Ukraine and for Russia's confrontation with the West.
To the US now, where there's a growing affordability crisis in the housing market. Sky-high home prices are forcing many Americans to rent, but with growing inflation already eating into tight household budgets, many people are feeling the sting of rising rent prices. They're up a record 20% from 2 years ago. As CNN's Vanessa Yurkovich reports, that's now forcing many Americans to leave their homes.
Less and less and less.
Maura Gilmain and her daughter Carson have 30 days to find a new home.
How many properties do you think you've explored?
Thousands.
For 3 years, Gilmain has been paying $2,100 a month for this 3-bedroom in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. But last month, she got a letter from her landlord.
Due to unforeseen circumstances.
Her new rent, $3,200 a month. An attorney for her landlord tells CNN rising property taxes and mortgage rates are to blame.
I freaked out. We can't do it.
There's a housing affordability crisis. Home prices are sky high, forcing more Americans into a competitive rental market. Gilmain, a single mom and disabled veteran, is reliant on rental assistance from Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. She already had fewer options, but now landlords looking to capitalize on rising rents are less willing to accept the strict guidelines of her rental voucher.
How critical is the HUD voucher to your existence?
That is our existence. Without it, we would be homeless.
Rents are rising across the country, up a record nearly 20% on average in 2 years. Double that in cities like Memphis, Tampa, and Riverside, California. But the Miami Palm Beach area tops them all at 58%, nearly 3 times the national average.
When there's a hurricane, it's illegal for gas stations to jack up the prices. Why is there not a cap in the state of Florida? Why am I looking at a 43% increase?
In fact, it's illegal in Florida to impose rent controls.
It actually gives me a lot of anxiety.
Sarah Espinosa is facing a 106% increase on her rent in Coral Gables, Florida.
Try to put it together.
For 22 years, she's called this 3-bedroom home. She raised her son here. She says the $1,700 she pays in rent is below market value, but the $3,500 her new landlord is charging is out of her budget.
It's not reasonable at all. I guess right now everybody's just price gouging because people need somewhere to live.
She set a new budget of $2,800. This week, she found an apartment right next door, but it's smaller and over budget by $400.
How does that rationalize in your mind?
It doesn't. It doesn't rationalize at all. I just think it's very unfair. It makes me upset.
You know how many people have reached out?
For Laura and Carson, their search continues with no prospects in sight.
So where does that put you?
Puts me on the street.
In Australia, the daily public updates about COVID case numbers are long gone, and so too are many of the restrictions. But there have been more than 1,000 deaths this month alone. It's higher than in the first 18 months of the pandemic, as the ABC's Gavin Coote reports.
A lot's changed since the Omicron chaos of summer, when infections were surging and rapid tests were in short supply. But as Melbourne University epidemiologist Professor Nancy Baxter points out, there's still been a continuous outbreak this year that's already had 2 peaks.
So we first had the BA1 peak and now the BA2 peak, and we do seem to be over the crest of that. But we continue to have a very high number of cases because we're relaxing all restrictions. And so it looks like what we're heading to is a plateau of a relatively high number of cases, which of course leads to a significant number of hospitalizations, deaths, and people with long COVID.
Australia has now passed 7,000 COVID deaths, and Professor Baxter feels these grim numbers aren't getting much attention.
When we think about it, in the first 4 months of this year, we've had twice as many people die of COVID as died throughout the first 2 years of the pandemic. So this is a significant number of deaths. We're very fortunate to have faced this wave with a well-vaccinated population, so clearly it could be much worse. But still, there are a substantial number of people still getting very ill from COVID and dying of COVID. And yet we seem to just be relying solely on vaccination and boosting, which, we could be doing more and we are not doing more.
Just under 70% of eligible Australians have had 3 or more doses of a COVID vaccine. And Professor Baxter expects rates of serious illness and death will remain high.
We're on track for more than 10,000 deaths this year from Omicron, which will make it one of the top killers of Australians. So this is going to have a major impact. And, people often compare COVID to the flu. In a really bad year for the flu, we have 1,000 people, unfortunately, dying of the flu. And here we're on track to have 10 times that many people dying of COVID.
Associate Professor Linda Selvey is a public health physician at the University of Queensland and reckons the shifting focus from suppressing COVID towards living with the virus has its cost.
So the deaths that we're seeing from COVID at the moment are really concerning to me, and I know to a number of other people, and I don't think it's we should be accepting those levels of deaths.
Would the public accept, though, a reintroduction of modest restrictions in order to limit the risk?
Well, it's difficult to know what the public would accept. I think because there's so little information readily available to the public about COVID case numbers and deaths now, like usually they're buried, that information's buried rather than being front of mind. I don't know that people are necessarily informed about the true cost of COVID at this point in time. To me, the simplest restriction would be the requirement to wear masks indoors when you're unable to, in crowded places in particular.
And Associate Professor Selvey thinks it might be possible to persuade people to do that if they were more aware of the toll that COVID continues to take.
The high-profile British DJ Tim Westwood has stepped down until further notice following claims of sexual misconduct. The former BBC Radio 1 DJ, who's 64, has strenuously denied predatory sexual behaviour, and touching allegations have been made by 7 women. The BBC's Chi Yazunda has more.
It's Westwood!
Tim Westwood has been at Capital Extra since 2013, presenting a weekly Saturday night rap show. But today, his employers at Global, who own Capital Extra, confirmed he was to step down until further notice. It's after allegations from 7 black women who've accused the DJ of predatory sexual behaviour and touching in a joint investigation between the BBC and The Guardian. Nyla, it's not her real name, met the DJ at a New Year's Day party in 2017.
One of my friends and I were at the front, and he kind of shouts me out for being the pangest girl on the rave. I was just like, okay. But one of my other friends wants a video with him, but as she's taken this video, he essentially moves his hand down my back and puts his hand up the back of my skirt. I stepped back because I'm a bit shocked from it, and I didn't really expect it to happen. I just felt kind of like objectified, really.
Tim Westwood worked at BBC Radio 1 for nearly 20 years, but speaking at a conference this morning, the Director General of the corporation said he was shocked by the allegations and urged anyone with a complaint to come forward.
The testimony of the women is powerful and appalling. And by the way, I would note the BBC, I credit the BBC and Guardian teams for going after the story, by the way. I think that's absolutely what we should be doing.
Westwood, you know what we're doing here.
2 nightclub appearances in Birmingham and Bognor Regis have also been cancelled, but the 64-year-old has denied the serious allegations in their entirety and says he has not acted in the manner described.
Well, the feedback's coming in thick and fast on the issue of the stench in Christchurch. Linda writes, it's like watching paint dry, waiting for the Christchurch City Council to get it, ! They seem unable to put themselves in the shoes of those affected by the stench. Rates relief now, not a discussion, meeting in a fortnight. Sheesh, she says. I'm a bus driver in Christchurch. Some buses have air conditioning. The sewage smell gets sucked into the bus. Linwood Avenue and Ferry Road are bad as well. The putrid Christchurch wastewater stench is not just in the Bromley area where it clearly is acute, but the clouds of stench drift across the city, especially to the southwest. And feedback on cancer drugs as well. NZ government gets its income from that team of 5 million. Australia, in contrast, has a team of over 25 million. Inevitably, they can afford more than our government. How can we ever compare our budgets, much less priorities? Regards, Terry. Thank you, Terry. More on Christchurch. It keeps coming. I live in Sydenham, a long way from the sewerage works. And they say we can smell it from here when the wind is from that direction. Bad in capital letters. They need to get the army in to sort it. Well, from army to engineers, this person says get some of them in to fix the problem. Our council is full of planners and administrators, no doers. These people aren't able to do the work as they continually show us, from a resident in Christchurch East. That's it from us. The Late team will keep you up to date with all of your news. If you missed anything, you can check it out on Spotify and Apple and all over the internet, really. Tomorrow from 5, first up, has the real-life fairy tale of how Cinderfella was reunited with his shoe after it was stolen by a mountain parrot. You won't want to miss that.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Hamilton police are concerned that a break-in at the Chartwell Mall involved a child as young as 7. Christchurch residents hope the council keeps its promise to find another site for the smelly organics processing plant at Bromley. A Muslim advocacy group says a report identifying white supremacy as the leading driver of online extremism confirms what the community already knows. And the Bay of Plenty DHB says it has an action plan in place after high rates of seclusion were found at 2 of its mental health facilities. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Possession of 5 grams of methamphetamine, that's a teaspoon. That's enough to warrant a conviction for possession for supply.
This is a health issue. Users, they're much better dealt with by trying to get them help, trying to get them treatment and keeping them out of the criminal justice system.
Hey, you know what this needs? Less regulation, but at least one person seems to have taken away that conclusion, and that's Elon Musk, and he's now in charge of one of the biggest social media platforms.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Hello, kia ora, and welcome along to Nights here on RNZ National. I'm Charlotte Ryan. It's time for Trending Now, and tonight, parenting skills for blended families. Many families consist of a combination of two different families with two sets of children living with the parents. Catherine Ryan talks with parenting coach and education consultant Joseph Dreisen, who has some tips. But first, the tiny east coast township of Tokomaru Bay has been hit by 3 major floods in less than a year. As the detail finds out, locals are getting pretty sick of the never-ending clean-up.
I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and today on The Detail I'm at Tokomaru Bay. I'm standing right here on the beach in the beautiful bay, and it was quite a shock coming into the township from Gisborne. About 10 k's out of town, there were parts of the road that were just broken, and now I'm looking at the bridge, which was partly washed away in the last storm and has been repaired, but at the time it cut the town in two. It's an absolutely stunning day today here in the bay, but this town has been hit by some really nasty weather in the last 10 months. In fact, 3 devastating floods have hit this town. And so I'm here today because some people in the community have been having a meeting at the local sports club. And I'm here to talk to some of those people about how they feel about living in a town that is so vulnerable to extreme weather. First, I want to talk to Lillian Tahoe Ward. She's in the middle of organising a hangi at the club for the Bay volunteers, the Ako Warriors, who leapt into action when floods hit for a 3rd time in 9 months.
I'm the secretary of the sports club. Whenever we have a weather event, I'm the civil defence lead. And I'm also the COVID hapu lead, so any whānau that have COVID in Tokomaru, I push out the support for them.
I am really shocked